In the year 1460, humanity faced what chronicles recorded as the War for New France. After years spent rebuilding their kingdom and restoring a sense of normal life, everything collapsed with the arrival of the being known in the records as Zhor Khul. New France became the first kingdom to face the entity directly. The northern defensive line of New France, the barrier dividing human land from the beast territories known as the Beast Line, was shattered in 1459. Its fall removed the last sense of security the kingdom possessed. From that point forward, the war was moving toward the walls of New France. The Kingdom of New France had been established in 1433, after the collapse of the old European states. Remnants of Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, and several other regions consolidated their surviving populations and formed a single fortified state in the Pyrenees Mountains. The kingdom relied on its geography for survival, protected by 80-foot walls lined with rows of bombardions aimed north, south, east, and west. With the northern defensive line gone, as covered in the previous episode, the forces of New France understood that their own walls would now face the beast advance. Fires could be seen from a distance as outposts and warposts fell one after another. The king ordered these positions to fight as long as possible, to buy time for the capital. Civilian populations had already been moved inside the mountain walls, but the situation was still deteriorating. Nothing slowed Zhor Khul or the beast army moving behind him. With the frontier destroyed, the path to the walls of New France lay open. If you're enjoying the series, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and keeps the Mechieval lore coming. At the foot of the mountains, the king's forces regrouped and formed a new defensive line across the lower gates of New France. The furnaces were restarted, and the bombardions and hurlbants on the walls were prepared for use. For the first time, the war had reached the mountain defenses themselves. The beast horde advanced across the plains in numbers impossible to count. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps more. King Adrian IV assumed direct command from the inner battlements, flanked by his generals and the surviving officers of the orders. Among them stood Zenira Mbaye. At dusk, the first ranks of beasts appeared on the northern plains, followed by more formations until the horizon was full. For years they had attacked without structure, but now they advanced in coordinated formation. King Adrian IV ordered the bombard towers to fire. The first impact shook the valley. Artillery continued for hours, but the beasts kept advancing, climbing over their dead to reach the lower slopes. Guardians held their positions in the mountain trenches, outnumbered but steady. Near midnight, the tremor beneath the stone changed. It grew heavier, slower, and deeper. The ground itself began to pulse in rhythm with something vast moving through the haze. Zenira felt it under her boots and recognized what it meant. Zhor Khul had entered the field. The bombard towers fired again, but their rounds vanished into the smoke before impact. The valley floor split under the creature's weight. Its roar struck the cliffs and drowned out the sound of every furnace and cannon along the line. From the command wall, King Adrian IV observed the defense of New France. Years of preparation had strengthened the position. The bombards on the upper walls reduced the number of beasts reaching the base of the mountain, giving the defenders below a manageable front. Adrian ordered the bombards to fire at will. The mountains shook under continuous fire, and the skies turned red. They came from every direction, west, east, and through the southern passes once believed impassable. New France was surrounded on all sides by a living tide that stretched from one horizon to the other. At the center of the assault, the mountain fortress burned like a forge. Commander Zenira Mbaye held the eastern wall. Her forces were still recovering from the retreat off the line. Their armor was cracked, their furnaces strained, but none stepped away from position. They fought from the parapets with little rest. The beasts charged without interruption. Thousands pushed upward through the fog, climbing over the bodies crushed at the base of the wall. Culverinius bombardions and Pundragonis hurlbants fired in continuous sequence, opening gaps in the advance that closed again within seconds. Heat rolled across the battlements as the weapons cycled without pause. Steel wardens moved along the walls under direct fire, refueling furnaces, sealing pressure lines, and keeping guardian suits operational while claws raked at the stone below. They worked beside the guardians until the parapets themselves began to fracture under the strain. Still, the beasts climbed. Filled trenches became ramps. The dead formed new pathways. The outer firing platforms disappeared under bodies, leaving the defenders with only handheld little bombardions and melee weapons. Oil, ash, and burned flesh thickened the air. By midday, blood ran across the stone at the base of the wall. The defenders fired blind through the smoke as the valley burned. Across the mountain range, horns sounded in uneven intervals. Each call confirmed the same reality. Every sector of the kingdom was under attack. Night fell, but the light did not fade. The plains below burned without interruption. Beasts climbed even while on fire, their silhouettes passing through the smoke. They did not slow, and they did not break. Zenira moved along the ramparts, coordinating the line. Damaged armor vented pressure and returned to position. Every guardian that fell was replaced immediately by another stepping forward, without waiting for orders. By moonrise, the lower slopes of the Pyrenees were buried beneath layers of dead beasts. Steam rose from the piles in the cold night air. Yet the wall still stood. The furnaces still burned. The villagers, women, and children withdrew behind the inner walls. The men, and all who chose to remain, joined the defenders on the ramparts and in the trenches. Every able person within New France now served the defense of the kingdom. By morning, the sound from the valleys had not faded. It had grown heavier and deeper, carrying the force of thousands more beasts pressing in from the north. The northern wall, held by the veteran divisions of New France and reinforced with the strongest Culverinius bombardions in the kingdom, began to falter under the pressure. The beasts advanced as a single mass, covering the entire northern slope. They climbed the stone face, clawing into the wall. The first defensive lines fought until they were overrun. Even then, the beasts did not stop. They moved over the wreckage, over their own dead, and through the fire that should have halted them. By midday, parts of the lower northern trench were gone. The beasts broke through the first wall section and entered the inner fortifications. Guardians met them in close combat inside the breach, led personally by King Adrian IV of New France, fighting beside his soldiers. At the eastern wall, Zenira Mbaye saw the reflection of northern fires through the haze. Zenira understood immediately. The outer slope was gone. She ordered 2 bombard batteries to turn north and fire across the valley, targeting the advancing beasts before they reached the breach. The shells crossed the mountain air and exploded inside the swarm, slowing their climb. By nightfall, the fighting along the northern rampart had lasted 15 hours without pause. Half the stonework was cracked. Half the bombards were destroyed. Yet the beasts were no closer to the inner gates. The defenders maintained their positions and held the line. When the moons rose, the northern slope was still covered in beasts, burning, crawling, and falling, turning the mountainside into a field of red flame. The wall did not break. Something felt off to Zinira Mbaye. The beasts did not require rest, yet during the assault, they halted at intervals, giving the defenders moments to regroup. It made no tactical sense. Zhor Khul was controlling the pace. Before sunrise, the mountain shook. The beasts forced their way through the northern breach. Tens of thousands entered the lower valleys of New France. For the first time, the enemy was inside the kingdom. General Vaillant sealed the inner fortresses and held the ridge with the remaining guardians, steel wardens, and a few functioning bombards. Marshal Dumont redirected his batteries to support the ridge until ammunition was nearly depleted. Commander Zinira Mbaye broke formation, marched west with reserves, and reached the ridge as the pass turned into a furnace. Her forces and Vaillant's remnants formed a new line inside the mountain and counterattacked. They fought for hours in the breach at close range. The bodies filled the passage until Dumont's last bombard sealed the gap with molten debris. When night came, the beasts outside did not enter again. The breach was closed, the enemy repelled. Casualties severe. The line held within the mountain. Smoke still covered the northern valleys. The defenders believed the enemy was regrouping. Engines cooled, furnaces vented, and the wounded were moved from the trenches. Then the mountain shook. It was not an explosion. It was a pulse. A rising scream followed, strong enough to break metal and shatter every window in the northern district. The northern walls collapsed under the force. Debris tore through the lower city. The beasts charged through the breach and overran the courtyards before alarms finished sounding. General Vaillant pulled his remaining divisions into the streets and formed scattered defensive pockets. Fighting spread through the lower city as buildings burned and machines overheated. Marshal Dumont attempted to redirect his bombards toward the breach, but his own sector was under attack, and he could not reposition the Culverinius bombardions. The beasts reached the inner walls, where civilians had been evacuated. They climbed over one another to scale the gates, tearing through the stone. Commander Zinira Mbaye arrived with a small detachment and joined Vaillant's forces. Together they held a final line between the lower city and the inner gates, but the pressure from the beasts did not stop. In the citadel, King Adrian IV ordered the inner gates sealed. The command spread across the remaining walls as bridges dropped and final positions were set. When night came, the inner walls were still standing, but the beasts were inside the capital. Beyond the smoke, the ground continued to shake as something larger moved toward the city. Night fell over a collapsing kingdom. The beasts had taken the northern quarter of New France, and guardians were fighting inside their own capital. The gates were destroyed, the walls failing, and every defender fought without formation. There were no reserves left. From the citadel, King Adrian IV watched the lower city burn. His final order carried across the bell lines: hold the inner walls. Then a new sound rose from the east, mechanical and steady. The ground vibrated as a line of furnace lights appeared along the distant ridges. An allied host was approaching. Thousands of guardians arrived under banners from multiple kingdoms and orders. They advanced across the eastern ridges, steam rising from their armor vents. Heavy bombards were deployed, and pressure shells struck the rear of the beast hordes surrounding New France, breaking their formation. The sainted flame cut through the eastern approaches. The Iron Mark assembly pushed into the rear of the horde. The Crimson Pact positioned siege bombards and shelled the central plain. The beast ranks collapsed under the coordinated assault. Inside the city, defenders saw the flashes along the horizon as the bombard fire struck repeatedly. The horde began to slow for the first time in days. By dawn, the Allied armies had forced the beasts out of the eastern valleys. The enemy still occupied the plains beyond the northern breach, but their structure had broken. Columns scattered under bombardment, retreating through the burning slopes. The horns of the eastern wall sounded. The signal reached every tower and trench that remained standing. The defenders believed the siege was ending. Then the ground shook. A massive shape entered the northern plain, and the beast army formed around it. Zhor Khul had arrived. High Commander Dure deployed the allied armies and opened fire, but every shell passed through Zhol without effect. Nothing damaged it. Dure charged, his weapon shattered, and he was killed. The line faltered. A single guardian, Chike Adu of the Crimson Pact, broke formation and ran across the field. He climbed wreckage and struck with both hands. His hit connected. Zhol's hand was severed. Black fluid burned through the ground. The beast ranks collapsed. Zhol retaliated and killed Chike instantly. It then caught Commander Zinira Mbaye as she advanced, threw her aside, and stepped back into the haze. The beasts retreated beyond the ridges. When the field fell silent, the armies saw the result. Zhor Khul could bleed. How Chike Adu achieved the strike remained unknown. The morning after Zhol's retreat was silent, except for cooling furnaces. The beast army had vanished, leaving bodies, broken armor, and scorched ground. The armies of New France and their allies did not advance. No one knew if Zhol was alone or if more like it existed. The wounded king ordered the commanders to retake the plains before the beasts returned. High Commander Dure was dead, so command passed to Marshal Kayla Verin, with Orson Val and Zinira Mbaye beside her. They combined their remaining forces into one column and prepared to move north. By midday, the advance began. Engines restarted, bombards were cleared, and the armies marched into the northern plains. The ground was burned and uneven. The remaining beasts attacked without order. Without Zhol, they had no discipline. The Guardians advanced in formation, supported by steel wardens and bombards that cleared the plains ahead of them. By nightfall, the Allied host reclaimed the outer ridges and several war posts. Steel wardens marked ground for new fortifications. It was not victory, but it was ground regained. On the forward ridge, Marshal Verin looked north. Zhor Khul was still out there. She ordered the army to halt and build a new perimeter. After the War of Zhol, the Guardian orders were heavily depleted, and many feared the borders would not hold if the beasts returned. As the armies rebuilt, stories from the war spread. Word of Guardian Chike Adu's strike reached every kingdom. He had done what no one else had, draw blood from Zhor Khul. His armor and weapon fragments were recovered, studied, and treated as relics. Remembrance turned into belief, and belief became an organized faith called the Believers. They viewed Chike as the one who proved Zhol could be harmed. Across the kingdoms, prayer turned into preparation. The leaders of New France and the Allied orders reviewed the losses. Too few Guardians remained. Guardian armor production had slowed, and the cost of deep expeditions into the Beastlands was unsustainable. With the human population growing, strength now lay in numbers. The age of the Guardian army was ending. At the Great Council of Pyrenees, the kingdoms approved the creation of a new force, an army that could be produced and deployed in large numbers. These soldiers would use lighter armor based on steel warden suits and wield a redesigned hand cannon rifle known as the Cannon Rifle. The project was called Iron Warden. They would hold the borders, man the lines, and push into the Beastlands. At Witch Hall, Commander Zinira Mbaye remained in recovery. She could not forget what she saw in Zhol's eyes and intended to learn how Chike Adu had struck the creature when others could not. For now, She oversaw the rebuilding of her order as a new age began. Thank you for listening. Up next, the rise of the Iron Wardens